Hello, welcome to my video series about ZZ improvement. So for the past, 14 years of ZZ, there have been almost no resources about ZZ improvement, and those that exist have either been on EOline or have been bad, or just generally they just haven't been a lot for people to go by. So I'm going to try to at least remedy that a bit with this series. There are going to be 3, maybe 4 videos, probably 3, about on each of the different main steps of modern ZZ. So I'm going to start off with EOCross. That's this video, and then I'm going to have one on F2L, and then finally one on last layer. And hopefully you will find these videos useful, and you can learn a lot from them, and hopefully they help you improve. And yeah, so the goal is really just to make ZZ more accessible, to make it more likely that people will get better with this method, because I am one of many who think that it's a method that has great potential, it just hasn't really been unlocked. And the people who have improved with it, such as Yoruba or Radmac, they're pretty darn fast with it. So Yoruba has an official sub-8 average, Radmac has an unofficial sub-6 average. So yeah, it's definitely a method that has potential, it's just underused, partially because there simply isn't enough out there for people to go by. So yes, hopefully this will help. This is mostly my experience of about 4 years of EOCross, 8 years of ZZ, mixed in with a few of the tips from people like Yoruba or Sign, who's pretty good at last layer. So yeah, hopefully this is useful to you and we can all do better ZZ solves. So in this series, I'm going to assume that you're already decent at ZZ, so you can solve EO line and inspection, let's say, or at least EO. You can do F2L comfortably, and you can also do OCLL, PLL for last layer. If you can't do that, I would recommend going to a beginner's tutorial or asking on ZMS on Discord or whatever, just to get to that point before you watch these videos. They'll probably be a bit helpful, but obviously you'll get more out of them if you are faster. So yeah, we're going to start off with EOCross, which is the first step of ZZ, arguably the hardest and can be the most confusing. I'm going to go through firstly how to get the move count down of your solutions, then how to increase your TPS on the solutions. I'm going to talk a bit about EOCross +1 and colour neutral, and at the end I'll throw in some experimental things such as EO 2x2x2, things that could add that little bit extra to your solves if you need to shave off those few milliseconds. So starting with move count, there are you can break down EOCross into 2 steps, EO then cross. Obviously you want to be doing them together, but if you're not good at EO and you're not good at cross, well, you're kind of screwed, aren't you? So I'll start off with this example. In this example, I have EO solved on green-blue axis. So the cross solutions with ZZ, with EO already solved, are quite simple. The main thing you need to be aware of is solving pieces relative to each other. So in this case, as you can see, the white-red piece is there. If we want to solve pieces relative to that, we look, what's opposite to red is orange. Look, that orange piece is already opposite. We've also got the white-blue and white-green edge. So what you could do is, you could either solve the red edge, then solve the green edge, then solve the blue edge, then solve the orange edge. But that's less efficient than just, okay, I know that, this red edge is opposite, this orange edge is pretty much opposite, and the blue and green edges are opposite from each other. So what I can do is, if I do a U prime then an L, what that does is that sets these opposite to each other, and these are just one move away from being solved opposite to these two. So if you look here, they're all solved, and then a D2 will solve them. So basically all I did is I solved them to a D2 away. Alternatively, you could have solved that, then done a D LR2, D prime LR2 D prime to solve the cross that way. Either way, you want to be trying to solve pieces relative to each other before adjusting the D layer. And then it might be the case that you solve pieces opposite to each other, adjust the D layer, solve pieces opposite, and adjust the D layer, or they solve them adjacently. So like here, let's say, go blue then red, next one's green. So instead of doing a D prime solving the orange, then a U then an F2 to solve the green, you can just solve the green, do a D prime and do an R2. That saves many more moves, and it will make just seeing EOCross and inspection easier generally. Moving on to EO now. So firstly, you need to be very confident in your EO solution. So here, I've got 1 bad edge, 2 bad edges, 3 bad edges, 4 bad edges, and 4 bad edges. So if you can't see the solution to this is that, then get better at EO. That purely comes from just doing a lot of solves. Either way, the solution to this is doing a U then a D to set them all up an F. And then now I could do one of two things, right? I could do an F prime or an F. Both solve EO, but which one's better? Well, if I do an F prime, you'd think that sets it up to be solved. Okay, yeah, that could work. I mean, in this case, it doesn't actually matter, but you always want to be aware of the other cross-edge pieces if there's one that you're orienting with an F or a B move. In this case, however, if you do the F instead of an F prime, sets these up opposite to each other, then we have the case we had at the start. Then you could do U prime L, F2, B2, D2. Yeah, so being aware of how your EO solutions affect your cross pieces is really the main way that you can cut down on moves, because if you're doing EO and then you end up with all the cross edges on the R face, let's say, something like that, right? That's going to be a pain in the backside to fix. However, if you had them more like this, still not great. Well, actually, that's pretty good. Actually, you can just do a D prime R, D prime R2, R2, which is a bit more efficient than if you had them all on R. So yeah, the general point is be aware of the pieces that you're affecting where you solve EO. That it's also quite hard, I acknowledge that, but if you can get that down and see, wait, if I do this EO solution, I'm not only affecting EO, but I'm also affecting the permutation of other edges, then your solutions are going to be much more efficient. So there are some tricks you can use for this. Here's the scramble that Radmac got in his 3.96. So there are 4 bad edges, 1, 2, 3, 4. But also the EOCross edges are 1, 2, they're there. So, I mean, if you were just thinking about cross normally, if you did an F, that would solve these two relative to each other. So that's good, but that's a bad edge. I need to get all my bad edges on F first. That would involve something like that, and that doesn't really leave you with a nice EOCross. However, you've got 2 bad edges there, 2 good edges there. If you do an F, it just switches which 2 edges are bad while solving this. So if you can track through the EO, wait, these 2 are bad, these 2 are good. Now if I do an F, these 2 are good and these 2 are bad. I know that's bad and I know that's bad. So if I set it up with D prime, R prime, then suddenly you've got 4 bad edges on front. So just by doing that simple F move at the start to switch the orientation of the 2 edges and also setting up the cross, it leaves you with a much nicer cross solution, an EOCross solution. And that's just been done by considering the cross, then seeing how it affects EO. So sometimes it's actually more useful to think of EOCross as cross EO, if you get me. Think of it backwards, so think about the permutation of the pieces. Then while doing that, how you can affect the orientation of those pieces. And you can use this in other ways. So take this setup here. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Wait, I can't count. 1, 2, 3, 4 bad edges. So the easy way would be to do U, R prime, no, L R prime F or something like that. But again, that leaves you with a pretty terrible EOCross. Instead, what you could do is you could think, okay, these two are bad, these two are good. If I do an F prime, this sets these two opposite edges to be solved relative to each other. And then it's just simply U, L, R prime, F. And that gives you a much nicer EOCross because you're considering the permutation of the other EOCross pieces while you're solving edge orientation. And that really is the main way you're going to reduce moves from, let's say it takes you 12 moves to do EOCross. Just thinking about this will easily take you down to 9. And if you think about it hard and practice more and more, you could probably get it towards 8 even. There are also different tricks you can do. So I'll just use this scramble, let's say. Let's say you had cross, you could get to a position where cross and solve, but then you had 4 bad edges, let's say here. Well, how are you going to get them onto F and B? You don't have to. You could use an S slice instead. Doing that solves EO, and it preserves the cross. You can do a similar thing with E, R prime, U prime, R, or S prime, U prime, S. All these, well, that disrupts the cross a bit, but let's say you have the bad edge here, where you can just use that to solve the cross. And all these are really good ways to preserve the cross while orientating the edges. And they aren't something you're going to be able to use every single solve, but it's just being aware of there are more ways to solve EO than just put all the edges on F. Because yeah, here, sure it'd work, but it's like a bit clunky. Whereas that is so much more elegant and neat. So I'll show you an example of this actually. This is a modified solution to what Raven did in the in a example solve game in the ZZ server, ZMS. This is going to look crazy, but go with it, okay? So there's a bad edge there, bad edge there, bad edge there, there, and there. So there are 8 bad edges. Wait, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, 8 bad edges. What he did is instead of putting them all on F, he does an S. Right, and you're like, okay, why did you do an S? Well, what that does is it does the thing where it flips the EO of F and B. So those two turn good and those two turn bad, and these two turn good and those two go bad. But it does both F and B at the same time. It also does a rotation. So most of the time you'd start from this angle and do an S into a normal orientation. Well, if you're white, yellow, colour neutral. But in this case, an S, and then doing L, U prime, R. What that does is, I'll put the scramble in the description, but what that does, that sets up so you have 4 bad edges on F and B. And then if you do an S again, that solves EO. So that was a 1, 2, 3, that was a 5 move EO, which is, it's fine, it's pretty good, but you use the S slice and that's the point. And then in this case, that sets up to a 8 move X EOCross. So not even, just having that flexibility allows for you to be able to find a different solution that sets up to a much nicer first pair or EOCross. I guarantee this is, not guaranteed, yeah, this is advanced, but if you get your head around it and do more solves while just being aware of it, it will slowly pop up more and more, and the situations where this kind of thing will occur will increase. And as you get more aware of it, it will be easier to spot it. So yeah, thanks Raven for that, because it's a pretty neat way of doing it. And now you're thinking, okay, with all that information, how am I actually going to practice it? So Yoruba came up with a drill. His drill is very simple. So if you're going to CS Timer or your timer of choice, set the timer input to typing, and then what you're going to do is you're going to scramble and solve EOCross while you count the moves. And you enter the moves as the time. So let's say it took you 10 moves, you'd write in 10. He says repeat that 50 times, so you might want to do it 30 or 100, whatever. And then after those 50 times, you go through, and everyone with a move count of 12 or higher, you want to do that again and try to find a more efficient EOCross. And then you keep on repeating that. And then once you're getting it comfortably under 12 over 50 solves every single time, you can say, okay, let's do it for 11. And then hopefully you should see your EOCross move count decrease. There are many different ways, as we've seen, to decrease the move count. It's just doing the solves and being aware of the different ways you can actually be more efficient. So now I'm going to talk about the ergonomics of EOCross. This is more simple than the move count, but it's still very important to consider, because if you're averaging 9 moves but your TPS is 3 moves per second, it's going to take you 3 seconds to do EOCross. When if you want to be pushing, well, if you're pushing sub 10/9, you want to be getting a sub 2 EOCross. And if you're pushing sub 6, which I hope is the aim of all of you watching this, you want to be getting really a 1.2 to 1.3 second EOCross. So having a good TPS throughout your EOCross is very important. So there are a few tricks that you can do to make it better. So firstly, we'll start with Radmax's solve that he did. Well, the solution here is really nice if you have green on front, but if you're someone who's fixed with having blue on front, let's say, the solution, it's alright, but it's just a bit clunky in it. Whereas if you do it from this angle, from F, it's so much better. And generally, what you want to do is you want to be finishing your EOCross solution, well, your EO bit on F, because that just leads to a generally faster transition, if you have to use both F and B. But generally you want to be avoiding the slower moves. So I know you can do B from neutral. I'm not very good at it, but it's still just slower than doing an F. Like, instead of that also is a regrip, and it's just kind of clunky. So yeah, try to have your EO solution finishing on F, so you can transition better into the next stage. But there are other things you can do to help this. So you can use wide moves. So this is an example where, let's say you, for whatever reason, I'm not sure what, but for whatever reason, you want to have green on front when you finish. There may be a good pair to go into the back left or something. But all your bad edges are in B. What can you do? So here the solution would normally be a B prime, D prime. But why would you do that when you could do an R prime, U wide prime? That's so much faster and a lot less awkward. Yeah, exactly. A lot less awkward than just doing that. Yeah, you know what I mean. So yeah, you can also use wide moves to help. Maybe you're going to use an R wide instead of an L, like something like that, instead of just using the cube in a way that makes the turns nicer. And you can similarly use it here. So that's the normal way of doing it, but it's just faster in this case with the 4 bad edges here to do M prime U M. Obviously you could do that. It is equivalent to doing L R prime F, L prime R, but it's just so much faster to use M moves in this case. So it's just being aware of all these different tricks you could do. Let's say you have an F B prime, instead of doing that or whatever, you can just do that with an S move. So yeah, it's just being aware of all these different ways to solve that will just that are just faster in general. And again, you can practice this in the same way as with move count with the Yoruba drill, but instead of typing the move count, you just time the EOCross, and if it's slower than a certain amount, so maybe let's say 2.5 seconds if you want to get sub 10, you do that EOCross again, and you might want to find a different solution or just do the same one because it's the best solution. But either way, you should really be drilling this as well once you've got the move count down, so that you can be faster with ZZ at the end of the day. Now you're hopefully averaging sub 9 moves and sub 2, or whatever your time is, and that should mean that, okay, your EOCross is pretty good now. What's next? So I think let's see if we can inspect more, and the easiest way I've found to do that is to track a piece. I generally try to track the corner, or the DBL corner, otherwise the BL edge, or another corner or edge that is most suitable to the scramble. I use this scramble to show what I mean. So on this scramble with orange, red, there are 4 bad edges, there and there, and white will give a very nice EOCross, and I'll show that in a second. So to solve the bad edges, an L, R prime, F would solve them, like that. But now if we track the EOCross, R prime, L, F will put the red and blue edges opposite. Here's the orange one, that's a B2 away from being solved. And the green, well, we could do a U2, R2, D2, or we could do a D2, L2. Both ways would solve that green cross piece. So now let's track this corner, because this is the DBL corner. If we track the white piece, well, the white stick, sorry, then R prime won't affect it, and L will bring it down, and the F will bring it back up to here. Which, after the EO, if I do an R prime L, F, that's going to bring this green edge back up to here. So effectively what we're having is we're going to have this white on top, green here, and white there. So we've got this, so we'll make a pair like that. And then the other piece that we have to track, if we want to make an EOCross, is the BL edge, which is this one. So if I do an R prime L, F, the only move that's going to affect this is going to be the R prime. So that's going to move the edge back to here. So we have green there, red there. And now we can see, because this cross piece is a B2 away, doing a B2 will actually solve this piece. Like so. So then what we finally need to think is, okay, we're going to have this piece a D2 away, this a D2 away, this a D2 away, and a pair up here, and the edge solved here. So what we can do is, if we do that, we can then do a U2, R2 to solve this cross piece relative to the others. It's also going to preserve the pair and preserve this solved piece. So R prime L, F solves the pair, solves EO, these are D2 away. B2 will solve that, also a D2 away, and this edge is solved. U2, R2 makes the square, then a D2 solves it. So yeah, that was obviously a nice scramble for the case. But if you're tracking through 9 moves, most of the time at least, you should be able to track either a corner or an edge to help you with that look head into F12. Yeah, so a different scramble. So in this scramble, I've got 4 bad edges on green blue, so I'll just do that for simplicity. I'll show you for this scramble I'm going to show you what an EO ribbon or an EO zipper is. And then, yeah, okay, this is an EO zipper. So this is a method, well, zipper was a method made by Justin Taylor, and the point of it was to, well, it's for CFOB, but you solve a cross plus no, this is ribbon, sorry. Yeah, this is an EO ribbon. The point of it is to solve a cross plus 1 F12 edge. So in our case, we're going to solve EOCross plus 1 F12 edge. And what this allows is, it allows for a keyhole solution. So in this case, we've got that edge solved and the rest of the cross done. And it just means that you're forcing a nicer F2L. And maybe if you're really good, you could pseudo slot the rest of F2L. So I'll show you what I mean. Actually, no, I'll come to that in the F12 video. but I'm just going to solve this cube as normal. But I'm going to, with good focus on this corner. So now at this point, this corner is in a good position to be keyholed. So you keyhole it in, then you carry on with your solution. What this allows for is, it's not quite an X EOCross or an EOCross plus one, but it allows for a much simpler F2L, because you already know where one of the edges are, and if you did an EO zipper, an EO zipper, sorry, which is when you solve one of the corners instead of edges, then it just allows for your F2L to flow more nicely, more smoothly, because you're only focusing on one of the pieces for one of the pairs instead of two pieces. And it also means you're more flexible because you can insert it quite easily with a keyhole trick, which is 5 moves instead of the average of 7 for a pair. Obviously you're not going to use it all the time, but it's just useful to have in your repertoire. I'm just going to finish off this section by just saying, look, you probably won't be getting this first try. It's going to take a lot of practice, a lot of patience. I don't think anyone out there currently plans EOCross plus one consistently. There are certain people who can do it more than others, and I'm okay at it sometimes, and even then not really. But I mean, if you can't even plan EOCross, that's obviously your goal, but yeah, just keep on going at it, keep on practicing, and you'll eventually get to the point where about half the time you'll be able to plan EOCross plus one comfortably. So yeah, just keep on going and you'll get there. I'm now going to talk about being colour neutral. So traditionally ZZ has been seen as not very good for colour neutral because you have 12 different EOCrosses and you need to plan each one and work out which one's the best, which really isn't the case. If you think about it, when you do an EO, you reduce the cube to RULD, so RULD. If I do a Z rotation, what was my R becomes my D, what was my U becomes an R, what was my L becomes a U, and D becomes L. So the moves stay the same, it's just what we call them changes. So in fact, EO doesn't change over a Z rotation. If this edge is bad, still bad, still bad, still bad, still bad. So then what that leads you to is you have 3 axes where you could rotate around. So green, blue, that's one axis. Orange, red, that's another axis. And white, yellow, that's another axis. So instead of having 12 axes, you just have 3 axes, so 3 different EOs. Then if you can plan the 3 EOs, well, you can inspect the 3 EOs, that's about 2.5 seconds if you get very good at it. You still have 11 seconds to be comfortable in planning EOCross in a competition. And so let's say there are 8 bad edges here, 10 bad edges here, but 4 bad edges here. Then you can pick, okay, 4 bad edges. Now, which one of these 4 has the best cross from that? So yeah, if you're pushing EOCross plus one when you inspect, doing this should actually be quite easy. So it's just getting used to inspecting the different EOs and then also doing the different EOCrosses. So for example, solving with orange on D instead of white on D, for example. But that's just for anyone who's switching to colour neutral in any method. It might be that you need to, well, there is another way of going about it. So Zaki, who is colour neutral with ZZ, he has an approach which is don't inspect EO first all the time. Sometimes you might want to inspect the cross first. So maybe there's a really easy cross on orange, and then you just have to decide whether to have green blue front or white yellow front. Or maybe there's a good cross on blue and you have to decide which front's better, etc. So going it like that might allow you to, instead of going from inspecting EO to having 4 crosses to choose from, you inspect cross and have 2 EOs to choose from. So it reduces your choices quite quickly and can allow for a further look into inspection. But it's also important that you're good at recognising EO, and there are different ways to recognise EO, but ultimately they all boil down to the same thing. But Zaki again, his way of recognising EO is probably a bit easier for colour neutral solvers. So I'm going to put a diagram on the screen now, pause the video, stare at it, see what it's saying, but that's his way of recognising EO, and if you're going to go for colour neutral, I would recommend trying to use that at least, because like I switched to using it for white yellow front, and it did help me a lot. And it also helps for when because I'm bad, when I have not white or yellow on D and I have green or red on front. So try using that and learning that. So there are two different approaches to get to being colour neutral. So there's the one which is the Z neutral approach, which I talked about. So start off, let's say we choose the green axis. Start off by just getting really good at inspecting that axis with any of the D colours. So orange or red or white or yellow. And then you do the same thing with the next axis. And then you finally do the same thing with the final axis. And hopefully by that point, by going through each axis, you're good at inspecting EO and reflecting it over the Z axis, well, over a Z rotation. And you'll be confident with all the D colours, so different last layers, different F12 filters, all that stuff. The other way is a more brute force approach, which is you just get good at green blue with white or yellow on bottom. Then you get good at green blue with red or orange on bottom. And it's still the same thing at the end of the day, but the way you go about it is you treat having different D colours as almost being different EOs in and of themselves. And then over time, hopefully you should achieve the same results whatever you do. But, you choose a way that works for you. But I would recommend just start being colour neutral as soon as you can. Obviously, it's going to be more difficult for some people than for others, and maybe you were colour neutral with CFOP, so it should be easier. But whatever it is, at least be X2Y. So what that means is have two colours on U or D that are always the same. So for me, it would be white and yellow. Then you can have any colour on F. So that keeps you with two axes, and per axis you have two EOCrosses. So it still gives you options, just less than full colour neutral. So the final step to having a really good EOCross is to not only do EOCross. So yeah, EO line, but I'm more thinking something like EO 2x2 or X EO line on left, or just an X EO line. And these things are more experimental, they're less developed, but having these in your arsenal to be able to solve with are very useful. So I've got this scramble here, which should demonstrate the point. So you've got 1, 2, 3, 4 bad edges here. If you look here, this is already set up quite nicely for a square on D, like that. And that's using a B move, right? And also this is the DBL corner, so you'd want to fill that in. So what you can do is if you do a D, what that does is that sets up this nicely, so that when you do that you can solve the 2x2. But also that's a bad edge, and the other bad edge is here. So what we want is we want to set this up so that the third bad edge is here, the place where the other three aren't. Bad, 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 good. So what we're going to do is I'm going to start off with that D, then I'm going to do an F2, L2, then a U prime, B prime R, then a D. That sets up this 2x2x2. And what it also does is it doesn't solve EOCross, which is fine, because we weren't solving EOCross, we were solving EO 2x2x2. So then what do we do now? Well, I'll show you. There's XEO line on left is where you solve the FL edge. So if I do an R2 to bring it here, And for reasons which will become clear in about 2 seconds, I'm going to do a U prime there. Now I can do an F2. That solved an X EO line, but on left. Look, it's on the left and it's an X EO line. If I do that, it's now on D and it's an X EO line, but it's now on left. And this is cool because you can solve the EO 2 by 2 by 3, this pair here, R prime U2 R, D prime R2 D prime, solves the 2 by 2 by 3, and that's in not very many moves. And the reason why I did that U is because if I go here, you just have a not as nice case to solve with. Either way, you can solve that pair, and then you solve right block, and then you're at ZBLL. So that's another way to go about solving using a ZZ approach, but with an EO 2 by 2 by 2 instead. You can also do an X EO line, so instead of being on left, instead of using the FL edge, use the DF edge, and then it's more standard ZZ. But either way, just being able to do a different approach to the first ed that might be more suitable in a certain case can be very helpful. And one of my best solves ever was an EO line solve with an easy extension, and then the blocks were easy, then the last layer was also easy. So just having those options to be able to do more and to be better is really helpful. So that concludes the EOCross part of the series. Hopefully you found this useful. Hopefully you can now solve one of these in about 9 moves in about 1.5 seconds and on any D colour with any F colour. Just start practicing, get the grind on, and hopefully this has helped, and hopefully it's at least inspired some of you to be better with ZZ. And if I've missed anything, just leave it in the comments, because I probably have. And a shout out again to Yoruba especially for this episode, because he gave some good advice on tips that he uses to make his EOCross more efficient. So as Jem would say, get out there and do good ZZ solves.